Welcome to episode 93 of the Lowdown radio show, presented by eBay Motors. I'm Neil Graham. This week, Motorcycle Global's Michael Uhlarik joins me to talk about the global motorcycle trade, much of which is far more unexpected than you may think. For instance, Michael hunted down the most searched for motorcycles online in India, Italy, and the US, the bikes people Google. Two of those countries searched for aspirational bikes, which is understandable, while one country chose a sensible, economical, middle-of-the-range machine. You'll never guess which country chose what. The results will surprise you. And then we discuss what's selling in each of those three countries and what's not. And as a bonus, we delve into the U.S. Motorcycle Industry Council and how its secretive sales numbers are out of sync with reality. And stick around at the end of the show for my preview of a handy little gizmo that'll make wiring your bike for accessories a breeze. But first, this message from eBay. The worst part about loving cars might be just buying them and all the parts. From Toyotas to Aston Martins, eBay has thousands of cars and the largest online selection of vehicle parts and accessories. eBay, things people love. So, Michael, we're going to talk about motorcycles today, which is unusual for us. And we're going to talk about the motorcycles that we most have in our gray matter, in that, which I have a fair bit of. So how do we define this category?
Okay, so what I did, as a warm-up to this perception versus reality conversation is I scraped the internet in native languages of three markets. So the United States, which is still one of the most influential markets. It's definitely in the top three in terms of revenue, even if it's a very small market. India, because it's the world's largest market and growing very fast, largest market for motorcycles. And Italy, which is within the European context, not only the largest European motorcycle market, but also the tastemaker. This is where all the legacy OEMs kind of figure out what's hot and what isn't. It's also where most Chinese and Indian brands have their design centers. So very important from an aspirational point of view. And I went into a number of different search tools online, and I scraped the internet to see what specific motorcycle models were trending the strongest on social media, journalism, mentions by motorcycle journalists, etc., in those three markets. So it's essentially it's not perfect, but the data was pretty strongly pointing towards these individual vehicles as the vehicles most mentioned, let's call it aspired vehicles in the motorcycle space in those three markets.
So we have two that are sort of predictable and one that is a bit of a surprise. And let's start with the surprise. Tell me what this bike is.
So this is a Kawasaki Z650 or Z650 if you're from the lower 49. The Kawasaki motorcycle you see is what we call mid-class in the industry, as in it's a middle displacement for 500 to 750, 800 cc motorcycle. It's a parallel twin. It's sporting, but not sport. It's not a sport bike per se. I mean, it's quick. It personifies the image of a naked ninja. And this was the most referenced motorcycle. And, star asterisk, it's really, this is not science, because there are so many social media aggregators. There are so many other ways to measure. A lot of people will be shouting at their iPhone or whatever the device that they're watching or listening to saying, that's nonsense. I've never heard anyone talk about this. Well, maybe you and your cohort haven't, because you're dyed-in-the-wool GS adventure people or Harley people, but this is what the kids, I guess, are talking about. And the demographics really peeled that back. It was people 30 and under. And they spend more time online than those of us with more gray matter, as you put it, who maybe appreciate other kinds of motorcycling. So this came as a surprise, because the US market is in decline. The motorcycle market has been in structural decline in the US for well over a decade. Sales are declining, specifically road bike sales, specifically street/sport bike sales. The top 5 best-selling motorcycles last year, most of them were under 500 cc. Most were 400 cc. It was DRZ, Honda CRF.
Well, don't give it away. We're going to get to that.
Yeah. So, but that was last year. That was 2024. So this type of bike was not popular in the consciousness of 2024. So what makes this interesting in 2025 is it surprised the heck out of me.
So because you thought you were thinking we were sort of post sporty standard, correct?
I was expecting it to be a dual sport.
Right. Now, what's unusual about this is really apparent when we go to some of the other motorcycles you pulled up. So for Italy, unsurprisingly, we have this. We have a Panigale. So whereas the Americans were being, in their fantasizing, were being quite reasonable, the Italians were not, and they were going right to one of the most expensive and exclusive motorcycles you can buy.
Yeah, and this is this matches the zeitgeist of the Italian motorcycle culture. Going back as far as my career, I went to Italy for the first time, professionally in 1998 to work for Piaggio, makers of Vespa. So not really aspirational products. Their bread and butter were plastic commuter scooters. And even then, and since then, if every time you went to a trade show, whether it was EICMA or the Verona custom show, or just talking to dealers, talking to consumers, magazines, it's been Ducati, Ducati, Ducati. Sometimes flickers of MV Agusta, Aprilia, but really Ducati wears the flag, the Italian tricolor, more than any other Italian OEM. They've come to signify what motorcycling means to the average Italian, even though the vast majority of them will never own one, or certainly never own a sport model or ride one. Whether it's an old lady in a cafe or just a man you encounter on the sidewalk who's not into motorcycling, you ask them what is motorcycling in Italy, they'll say Ducati, and they associate Ducati not with the Monster or the Scrambler or with Multistrada. It's with full-fared, blood red super sport motorcycle. So that social media in general in Italy, identify the Panigale, which is just the most recent iteration of their top of the line sport model, in a year that they won the world championship in Grand Prix and MotoGP, doesn't surprise me in the least. It's a dramatic, in your face looking and sounding motorcycle. It's expensive. For most people, it's unobtainium. It lives in there for free in their head space, the way a Lamborghini or a Ferrari does for teenage boys, all around the world.
Is it comparable to do you think, to the relationship that Americans would have with Harley Davidson?
I think that's exactly right. I think any American who has zero interest in motorcycling, you ask them, what is a motorcycle? They'll say Harley Davidson. And they don't know the difference between a Street Glide and a Sportster or a Road King. They just have this idea in their head of, a big, what JT Nesbitt called a big touring motorcycle, American touring motorcycle, which is touring for the rest of us. It's a V-twin, lumpy, loud, slow rolling, but big personality, made in America motorcycle. And I think that's accurate. I think that's what I expected social media and trending references to motorcycle in America to continue to be, and surprised that the culture is evolving, at least in the US.
The next country we're going to go to is India. Now, what's kind of interesting about this, if I can pull it up, is so this is the Royal Enfield Himalayan. Now, to us, this is an inexpensive motorcycle, but of course, domestically, it's very different, isn't it?
Well, yes. I would like to take a moment to disavow many listeners who are not familiar with India of the notion that India is this impoverished third world country where people live in dirt and filth and have no money. That India still exists, absolutely. However, unlike if you're listening to this in Europe or Australia or Canada, the US, where despite what we are experiencing, there is a pretty compressed range of poverty to upper middle class. In India, it's very expanded. So you do have a lot of that sort of stereotypical image of poverty. But India has the world's largest middle class, and they have the largest number of millionaires in the world of any country. If you're in a city in India, any city, and remember they have, a dozen cities that are in the millions, Chicago-sized cities and New York-sized cities. You have this affluent middle class who buy the same products we do, who travel like we do, who own nice cars, who have nice homes, who have this disposable income for lavish things. So the Himalayan to them is not a big deal financially. What I think, and I haven't done a deep, this has not been profoundly researched, but this is based on my quarter century of experience and recent experience analyzing the Indian market for various individuals and customers. The Indian aspiration is no different than the Western aspiration. It's less about money now and more about, for lack of a better word, adventure, about aspiring to an experience. So where the Italian aspires to the Ducati and the American, we used to think, aspired to a big Harley Davidson motorcycle. Why? Was it status? Yeah, a little bit, for sure, with the Ducati, sure. The Himalayan, in my opinion, is not a status symbol in the sense of, oh, it's so hard to get here. It's that what Royal Enfield have done better than literally any other brand in this century, in the 21st century, is tell an incredible story around the brand. And that story is a merger of heritage, history, a lot of it fabricated, or I take that back, cherry-picked. And
like all the best stories.
Like all the best stories. I mean, don't get me started about Ducati. But the reality is that the Himalayan represents this zenith of what, like, we're watching this is an ADV rider podcast. So presumably a lot of the listeners, or majority, are lean towards adventure motorcycling. What Royal Enfield has been able to do with their brand is tell a story the way Jeep did with their mediocre, civilian car, the Wrangler.
Right.
That this is this ultimate synthesis of you can go anywhere, do anything, and experience a once in a lifetime journey. You need this. You need this. Because it's like, we've been doing this. We've been riding across the Tibetan plateau on bullets since the 1940s. And, and this thing is tough and robust, and it's simple where the other stuff is complicated. And, Japan is about high tech, and Europe is about heritage and, maybe extreme performance. And the Himalayan is that tool in your tool belt, that reliable thing that will just grind through. Is that true? Well, no more so than that DRZ 400 or any other Japanese single cylinder, dual sport. But Himalayan has the design and the narrative and the advertising, and we're into the second generation of this bike, really solidified that image, I think, in the minds of a lot of people. And it's really clearly evident that it's solidified that image in the minds of middle-class Indians and aspirational motorcyclists in India who like this idea that, yeah, they're proud of their country. They're nationalistic. They're like, this is made in India. And this is one of the best in the world at doing this. So I think there's a merger of things here. India is asserting itself culturally on the world stage. That's very powerful for Indians. They would rather aspire to this than to, say, a legacy brand from Europe, which maybe used to be the case. And the product is genuinely excellent, and it looks good, and it looks different. And I think that's a big part of it. And, people listening might be saying, well, this guy's really hard, in the bag for the Himalayan. I am. I think it's outstanding. I think this is what the Japanese could have been doing for the last 30 years, but are always terribly afraid to do, which is be proud of who you are and where you come from. And the Himalayan does that. And I think that's just naturally that, and that it's a great product resonates strongly with the local market. That's my analysis.
What is it, in your view, that makes the Himalayan different from a Japanese dual sport of comparable displacement? Because I'm not sure a lot of us will look at this and say, well, I see massive distinctions between this and, a 300 Honda or a Kawasaki or another brand. In your mind, what makes the difference for the Himalayan?
Two things. Functionally, rationally, cold-blooded, just looking at it as a machine, the difference is that it's inferior. Period. End of story. If you ask me cold-bloodedly, you have a choice. This, a CRF 300, a DRZ 400, a Yamaha, I don't know, 225 Zero. Which are you going to take around the world? I'll take any of the Japanese motorcycles over this, for the simple reason that they've been making them for so long. They are legendarily reliable. The parts are available everywhere. Like we all have this experience. But we aren't, so that's, you asked the question, what makes it different? So this is not better on any, empirical level, which means, and this is the second part, the second half of the answer, it's unique. They didn't copy. They didn't do what CF Moto does, what the Zhongshan Lonsin group do. Now, the Chinese are now making their own indigenous motorcycles ground up. They're not copying. Hear me, audience. The Chinese are not copying us anymore. We are copying them. Subject for another podcast. But the Chinese starting point is always to benchmark the market leaders, which are almost always Honda products. And so they tend to kind of imitate the vibe and the layout and the engineering solutions that the Japanese do, for good reason. They work. Whereas, what I think sets the Himalayan apart and Royal Enfield in general is they're pretty strong-headed about doing things their own way. Like technologically, look, it's a steel, cradle frame, might be a spine over. I'll be honest with the audience, I haven't spent a ton of time studying the Himalayan. But, there are not a lot of technical solutions to the Himalayan that are unique. What's unique is the layout, the motor. They didn't just decide to imitate, tear down a Honda motor and kind of copy the general dimensions and pick up points. They did it their own way. Wheelbase, trail, styling for sure. It's kind of got this retro vibe, but not in a cheesy Husqvarna way. Like what I mean is, or Triumph, which is literally in your face saying, I am calling back the 70s. They're not doing that. It's just like the round headlight and the steel tank with the exposed welding flange is a psychological cue to motorcycling in the 80s.
Right.
And I think a lot of us look back at the 80s, even people who weren't alive then, who are the main demographic here, Gen Z, they look back at the 80s as a time of honesty. They're so sweet in their naivete. But then, they think the products were more honest, which from that standpoint is true. And so not having all these plastic, juju covers.
Right.
This is the problem. The Japanese overstyle everything because they live in their world, which is a wonderful world. It's called Japan. And Japanese design is aspirational in its own way, but they don't know when to put their pencil down. And this thing is just what it is. The fuel tank is there. It's got these two little side covers, and the rest is just functional. And in an era where everybody, including KTM, including BMW, including Triumph, don't know how to stop designing, this thing just says, I am a tool. I am your slobbering Labrador dog. I am loyal to a fault. I am physically and emotionally robust and a little simple.
The cars you'll find on eBay are just different. They come with a story that you can't wait to share. Maybe it's the car's history or the story of how you found it. Like this 1973 Dodge Charger on eBay that had been tucked away in an Arizona barn for over 40 years. Only 55,000 miles, and somehow in great running order. It even has a rare sunroof. Suddenly, a car that was hidden for decades is uncovered on eBay and ready to be delivered straight to your driveway, thanks to eBay's Secure Purchase, the new seamless and secure way to buy your next car. In just a few clicks, the title and DMV paperwork is all handled for you. There are thousands of cars like this on eBay, from rare finds like the Pontiac Grand Prix SJ to unique builds to your next daily driver. And now, a new seamless way to buy them. eBay. Things people love. The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Michael, you've given us the numbers of what, at least according to Google, what people are actually fantasizing about or researching or at least pulling up images or text. But then there's the point where actually people buy stuff. And we're going to start with India. So here is, and the numbers here are astounding, and maybe you could reference them. What is this?
So, look, these are motorcycles that most people have never seen. If you're a typical sort of, ADV rider viewer, but the reality is that in India, the best-selling motorcycles are all commuter bikes that look like things from the 60s. They're 125 to 200 cc, this should come as no surprise. This is a Hero Splendor. If you've spent any time,
excuse me, this is Splendor Plus.
I stand corrected. It is a Splendor Plus.
Yes.
Hero is an Indian manufacturer. For those who don't know, for years and years they touted themselves as the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. The reality is Hero was the joint venture partner of Honda in India.
Right.
Back in the day when India was an entirely state-controlled economy, not communist, but very, very gated. The only way Western companies could do business there was to set up what's called a JV, a joint venture partnership with a local manufacturer. And we're talking India in the 80s, when it was the India that maybe some people imagine, those who haven't traveled in the last few decades, like really a developing country with very limited industrial and technical capacity. And so, for example, where I started my career, Piaggio had created a JV with Bajaj, the company that recently acquired KTM. At that time, Bajaj was an industrial, farm machinery company that was, had some capacity, and Piaggio goes in there and says, well, we'd like to build the Ape, which is that three-wheeled front end of a bicycle with a cab and a kind of pickup truck back. And Honda partnered with Hero. And so Hero Honda, as it was called for decades, was absolutely by far the motorcycle brand in India. They made old Honda motorcycles and scooters that were obsolete in the West, and they just tooled them up and punched them out, and they were headquartered in Delhi in northern India. Fast forward 30 years, Indians deregulated, they allowed foreign companies to come in, and Honda's, the agreement came up, and Honda's like, see ya, we're going to set up on our own. And Hero has slid from unequivocally the world's largest brand in India and one of the world's largest just on volume in the world to decidedly smaller market share in India and globally because they're making their own product. The Splendor is, I don't know for sure, but I have pretty good idea that it is an evolution of Honda knowledge of, think CG125, that kind of lineage. It's not a copy. Let's be frank again. Indians are a very high-tech country. They have a space program. They do not need our help. But this type of motorcycle is what you see by the tens of millions throughout Southeast Asia, because they're simple, they're reliable, and there is a Hero dealer in every village in India. In India, you go to a village with 700 people. If there is somebody who retails or repairs motorcycles, it's their principal stock and trade is Hero, and that distribution network, that 5 decades of brand embedding at the grassroots level means that the Splendor and its various line extensions are absolutely the market leader. And there are modern versions of this that look more like a contemporary motorcycle with plastic contemporary styling and, you know, nice wheels and stuff like that. So, you know, you chose a particularly like bargain basement.
You can buy it for 4 gold coins.
Apparently, yes.
For those who are listening to this, we're looking at an ad of the Splendor Plus, and it's quite. There's a little graphic in the upper left corner of 4 gold coins with an arrow pointing to it. So I'm just assuming that 4 gold coins will do it. Now, but what are the numbers? You have the numbers of sold, which is this, and this is like more than most brands. This is one model. This is more than most brands will make in a lifetime.
So this one vehicle from one manufacturer, because Hero has a lineup, deep bench, electric, off-road, sport models, like really, you know, it's a modern OEM. This entry-level product, they sold 3 million of just in 2025. 3 million units of the Splendor in India in 2025. Let me put some context there. It might be the best-selling motorcycle model in the world because about 63 million motorcycles are bought and sold in 24 and 25 per year. Honda sells about 20 million. Honda. So 3 million for one model. So again, you know, people go, Harley Davidson's a big, important company. Harley Davidson will sell about 100,000 vehicles this year. BMW will sell about 250,000 vehicles. These guys sold 3 million of one model. And in India, your monthly sales figures are what people talk about. Monthly figures are 50 to 150,000 units per model.
It's really, you know, when you
they love their motorcycles.
When you come from a small country, those numbers are just astonishing. I mean, it's just head shaking. Now let's move right into. You talked about Hero's joint venture with Honda, and then Honda got out of it as soon as they could, as soon as Indian legislation changed, and they make the Shine, which is here, the Shine 125, which is shown in this rather provocative ad. There's 3 young women dressed in business attire, holding a red towel over something. Well, the man in the
actually, this is not an advertisement. This is an unveiling.
Oh, it's an unveiling. Okay, I thought it was an ad.
So the viewer, this is these are presenters introducing a new model year of the Shine 125.
Oh, I see. So they pulled that off. I thought they were holding it up like a bullfighter would hold up a red, and he was going to charge at them. I misread these things all the time.
That's why you've got me. So no, this is probably at a dealer show or at Auto Expo in Delhi. So the Shine 125, for those who are listening, not watching, looks like a really small scale version of a CB 1000R or a Hornet 600 Hornet with a small 125 engine. It's got great looking modern, you know, like I say great looking, like look, it looks like a modern motorcycle. You know, it's small, naked, sporty little thing. Yes, it has skinny little tires and probably 12 horsepower or 15 horsepower, but that's enough for most people. Again, let me reiterate, this isn't just India. In the world, 98% of motorcycles sold produce less than 10 horsepower. The world moves on 2 wheels, not on 4. More people depend on 2-wheeled motorization to get to work, to school, to market, than they do depend on privately owned cars. That said, you know, Honda is the market leader in the world in every market. They now are the market share leader in India. You know, and because they make fantastic, reliable products like this, they're not going to make your head spin. But you know what? They'll always run, and they always have, let's say, a modern feature set. So, you know, ABS, headlights that work, you know, excellent fuel injection. You know, so the Shine 125 is the second best-selling machine in India in 2025 so far. I say so far because India's accounting year isn't in line with Western calendar. So technically 2025 doesn't end until April for them. But for the calendar year 2025, this was the second best-selling machine.
What you said is I think something to ponder for those of us in Western countries where motorcycles rather are toys.
Yeah.
But as you said, the world moves on two wheels, and what is it? 98% you say are under 10 horsepower, 10 horsepower or less, which is just incredible. There's this whole other world that really we don't even, aside from people like you, but most of us here never even think about it, do we?
Yeah, I in my travels, I encounter Canadians and Europeans, Americans all over the world, people who are not in the bike business, but who travel for their work, for their lives require them to go to places like Mexico or China or whatever. And, whatever industry you're in, if you travel at all in this world outside of Canada and the US and Australia, then this is the ubiquitous motorcycle.
Yes.
Like this type of machine. And so while they may not think, well, how many horsepower, they're gonna get that it's a small bike. And it's utilitarian, and it's the invert. It's really simplified. It's the opposite exactly of how Canadians, Americans, and a lot of Western Europeans see the motorcycle. It is not recreation with a secondary commuter function. It is a commuter with a secondary recreation function. It's, yeah, I could take the beat up car, the bus, my nice car, whatever, but this is more fun. And it's very economical. Look, bottom line, the motorcycle predates the car by about 15 years in terms of human invention. And, most heritage car companies started off making motorcycles. The motorcycle is the most efficient way to move a single person at speed. The most efficient way would be a bicycle, but with some sort of propulsion system, it's a motorcycle. And you can move 3-4 people on a motorcycle. I just came from Mexico, saw it every day, and you laugh, but if you're in a small coastal town in Latin America, or you're in the Indian Plateau, or you're in some suburb of a second-tier city in China, traffic's not moving fast. They have a very different relationship to road safety than we do, and it's not a put down. That's not a joke. They drive and they operate motor vehicles the way our cultures did in the 1950s. There are people or commenters on this site who will talk about how great it was when they were kids and they didn't need insurance, and they ripped up and down Main Street anywhere, USA, on some imported Japanese two-stroke with no helmet on. And those were the days. Well, yeah, those are the days currently in most of the world. And the traffic fatalities are, catastrophic in those places as a result. But if that is the milieu, if that is the way people behave, then why not put 3 people on a motorcycle? Or, a motorcycle can carry a washing machine, from a shop to a favela.
I remember seeing in a couple of years ago when I was in India, there were signs everywhere that would say, would show a picture of a motorcycle with the number 3 and a line through
it. Yeah.
Meaning don't take 3 people, don't take 2 with you as you're the pilot on your motorcycle.
In that zone, it's kind of like the German Autobahn, where it's not unlimited everywhere. And you get the sign that tells you, okay, here there's a speed restriction. So in some parts of India, it's like, here there is an occupancy restriction, low occupancy motorcycle zone.
Let's move on to Italy. And of course, you mentioned earlier, Michael, that the Italians in their Google searches tended to favor the Panigale. And of course, they're Italian, and they won, as you said, they won the world championship. So what's not to love if you're Italy? But then there's the difference between what people actually buy and what they Google. So here's one that is a popular motorcycle in Italy. What do we have here?
Africa Twin, Honda Africa Twin.
And actually, no, I think you're wrong. That's the NC 750X.
Oh, my apologies. But the best-selling bike in 2025 in Italy was the Africa Twin. But the NC is in the top 5 as well.
That's right, yeah.
In fact, Honda has 3 of the top 5 selling bikes in Italy in 2025, and 3 of the top selling scooters in Italy in 2025. So, but yeah, the NC 750X, which is a street bike with wearing khaki cargo pants and light hiking shoes. It's dressed up for a brisk walk on a gravel track. It's not an adventure bike, although they call it that. But
but it has a frunk.
But it has a frunk. I hated this bike. As I did a test of the first gen NC 750, as you did for different magazines when it came out, and I hated this bike. But it's not for me. What it is a Honda CRV. There's nothing off-road about it. There's nothing robust about it beyond the usual Honda excellence. It is a 750cc street bike that's super comfortable, easy to maneuver, can handle anything. Not exceptionally, but very well. And it's affordable, and it's a Honda, so it'll outlive us and the cockroaches. And the reality is that Italians mostly use motorcycles for commuting. So very similar to India, in the sense that Italians view motorcycles as just a natural part of the transportation mix. And they buy 500,000. The Italian market is the size of the US market. Little Italy sells buy as many motorcycles and scooters as the entire United States. But what they buy are vehicles that they can use every day. And then happen to have a little bit of a recreational angle. The best-selling bike, I don't know if you have an image of it, but in Italy in 25 was the Honda Africa Twin. And look, the Africa Twin doesn't get the love that it deserves. And again, some people are going, this guy's so in the bag for Honda. Look, they're number 1 in the world by such a laughably large margin. You can't fight facts. Sales numbers don't lie. Feelings are one thing. Facts are another. And
I thought we were living in the post-fact era.
Well, people can live in the world they wish to of their choosing, but Italians are style conscious, economical. That's not although it's one of the richest countries in the world on a spreadsheet, the average Italian is doesn't have oodles of disposable income. The Africa Twin is an outstanding adventure motorcycle.
Although I am showing the Transalp here for those about to write in. This is the Transalp.
Which is also a popular bike among Italian law enforcement. So the people who depend on their motorcycle every day, they have Transalps. But the Africa Twin is as capable, or I think more capable than the GS. It's cheaper than a GS. It's more reliable than a GS. And the irony of the Africa Twin being best-selling bike in Italy is that the entire BMW GS mythos, although expanded dramatically by the Borman, Ewan McGregor around the world stuff and other things, really starts in Milan. Not because of any celebrity, but because Milanese high-powered businessmen were commuting to downtown to the financial district. And they liked the GS because it had the prestige of being a BMW brand, where a lot of them drove BMW cars, and BMW was seen as elite. But because of the GS tall, wide stance, the robustness, everything was metal. I'm talking the like 89 to 94 GS, the first double beak, the one with the deranged expression. That thing was super popular and in Milan. And as a consequence, became a self-fulfilling, like, oh, high status people buy this, it must be good. And then people who were like observers, and it spread from Milan to other major cities in Europe, and then the GS became the must-have, Range Rover of motorcycles. The Africa Twin doesn't have that reputation. Actual ordinary people just know that if you want a large displacement adventure motorcycle, that's the best choice, and the sales don't lie. So, Aspiration in Italy is a Panigale V4. Passion, emotion, speed, drama. And what do Italians buy more than anything else? The exact opposite. Like a toaster, a machine with no personality, but that is exceptional at what it does. It's about comfort. It's about flexibility. It's about longevity. It's about resale value. It's about practical, pragmatic motorcycling. So it's interesting that this country is so famous for, thinking with their hearts more than their heads, actually shop with their heads.
I mean, as an aside to that, I mean, how do Italians view Italian motorcycles? Because of course, the rest of the world, I think it's as sort of set an image as people around the world think of Harley Davidson, or that we think of Harley Davidson. But within Italy, how are they viewed?
I'm going to say, shocker, triggering alert. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here. But in my lifetime of observing the motorcycle industry and its culture, every culture that I know, with two exceptions, follow roughly the same pattern. So to answer your question, Italians have a dim view of made in Italy. Indians have a dim view of made in India. Chinese have, generally changing a bit now, dim view of made in China. What do I mean by that? Everyone is proud of where they're from, and you should be. I come from a pretty ugly town in a pretty not great part of Ontario, but it's home. Emotionally, it's home. And, and that's okay. But as much as Italians are passionate about Ferrari and Prada and, whatever, Ducati, the average Italian, and certainly the expert Italian, as in enthusiasts, people who are into motoring, the people I've done this show from, in Bologna where we develop motorcycles, profoundly proud Italians, very proud of the work they do, excellent work, high-end engineering, world class. But they know that sometimes made in Italy means slightly sloppy quality control, inconsistent financing. That's modern, and then 30 years ago, it was inconsistent engineering. Indians, passionate about India, love made in India, love the vibe, but they aspire still to foreign brands. And in Italy, the best-selling cars are all like German, and,
Right.
I find this pattern repeats. Yes, Japanese buy a lot of Japanese cars and motorcycles, but the moment you have a little bit of aspiration, you're buying an imported car. Again, probably German, maybe Italian. The exception to this is the Anglosphere. And I don't include Canada or Australia in this. I mean Britain and the United States. Britain has slowly come to accept that made in Britain generally means crap. And people are going to explode. Look, Jaguar Land Rover, impressive company, quality control problems since time immemorial.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who owns them. Americans owned them, helped, didn't solve the problem. BMW owned Rover, helped, didn't solve the problem. Honda owned Rover. I mean, fuck, if Honda couldn't fix it, so it's just something baked into the culture. They're a little bit, I don't know what. And the other one is the US. Americans believe that made in the USA is the best, end of story. And it's very hard for many people in those cultures to accept that, maybe you'd be better off. That said, best-selling cars and motorcycles in Britain are not British. Best-selling cars and motorcycles in America are not American, by and large. So the noise of, local is best is loudest in Britain and the US. But when people vote with their wallet, the facts are pretty clear. Drive down the road of, Main Street, USA, and you see a lot of Hyundais, a lot of Honda Toyotas. Yeah, Chevrolet is still, and Ford are still big, but not like 50% market share or 70% market share, which they were when you and I were starting our careers.
Right.
Which is a long time ago for us, but not long ago in the scheme of things. So on the motorcycle front, I know this having worked for Japanese, Indian, European brands. The first loudest critique of domestic product in Japan are the Japanese. The loudest critique of Italian products in Italy are Italians, etc. Germans are famous at navel gazing. We are so bad at this, and sometimes that's healthy. It's a lot healthier than humility and self-doubt. I think are fundamentally healthier than the other end. We're the best.
Lastly, we're going to talk about the American market, and you warned me that you have a number of caveats that you are going to start with. So name your caveats, and then let's get into the top 5.
Okay, so the American motorcycle industry is a mystery. Everywhere in the world, other than Britain and the United States, motorcycle sales data is public knowledge because it's regulated. It's a motor vehicle. Motor vehicles have to pass strict safety and emission regulations in every major country in the world, including the US and Britain. And as such, government, it's a controlled product, like they come with VIN numbers that are close, etc. But in the US and Britain, reporting is left to private organizations run by the manufacturers themselves. So the Motorcycle Manufacturers, Association in the US closely guards this data, and you have to pay a lot of money to get access to it.
Now, is that the Motorcycle Industry Council? Is that what that is?
Yes, the
MIC. Yeah.
And they will come after you if you buy the data and then publish it and stuff like that. So apparently it's a secret. Now, what's important here is that because the data is published by an industry council, I trust the data that they publish, but it comes late. So we're in January. For those of you, whenever you're watching or listening to this, it's January 15, 2026. They have not yet published that data. So the observations I have are based on my company, Motorcycle Global's own tracking, which we do for 30 countries. And it involves me with the US dipping into personal relationships that I don't disclose with dealer groups and people I would know in the industry who tell me things, and also some public disclosure, which happens thanks to third parties. This great organization in Italy called motorcyclesdata.com, who track like 170 countries. And so there is data, but so what I'm going to talk about for 2025 is best guess based on the data we have. So I think it's instructive to talk. So there's that. And then the second caveat is this. If you're not a member of the American Motorcycle Association Industry Council, your data isn't represented. And you say, well, how is that possible? Isn't it obligatory? Well, yes and no. Again, America is special.
So just to clarify, so if you're a manufacturer of whatever, anything, you have to pay money and join the MIC, or else
Correct.
your vehicles are not counted and therefore don't exist in their numbers.
Correct. And in a market like the US, where more than half of motorcycles sold are off-road, unlicensed, uninsured dirt bikes, and the fastest growing sector in motorcycling in America are electric, uninsured, off-road motorcycles that are made in China, none of whom are represented by the MIC. You can see where I'm going with this.
Right.
There is a distinct lack of transparency in the data. So that said, maybe we start by recapping 2024, things we know.
Well, actually, if I can jump in for a second.
Yeah.
Why the secretiveness? Is it just because they don't want people to know how many? Are they embarrassed that they sold so few whatever? Or is it just, is the MIC just a for-profit company that just wants to take these numbers and make money off it? Why when everywhere? Because I mean, and just sort of finish this thought. I remember reading I think it was an old issue of Australian Motorcycle News, and on the inside copy, inside front cover, or within the first few pages, they would list the model and how many sold in the previous quarter, previous month, or whatever it was. So in other countries, as you say, it's very transparent, but it's such a cloak and dagger thing that's not even accurate because so many brands aren't even included. So why is that, do you think?
So first of all, simple answer, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. Here's what I think. For 30, 40 years, the US motorcycle industry was dominated by 4 Japanese brands and Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson represented 50% of the on-road market, sometimes upwards of 60% of the on-road market. It's a private company, or sorry, a public company listed on the New York Stock Exchange with vast amounts of political and financial capital. It's not a conspiracy. I'm not talking about that. But the reality is that Harley Davidson got bailed out by the US government. Harley Davidson got all kinds of preferential treatment from the US government in time, like literally tariffing the hell out of their competitors to unfairly boost them. And okay, that's a discussion for another time. But the reality is, I don't think it was in Harley's interest sometimes to be entirely transparent about their shipping and sales numbers. They are filing legally with the SEC, and their numbers are, those are legally vetted and stuff, but they count a sale as when the bike gets shipped from the Milwaukee to the dealer, not actually registered in customer hands. And I think the Japanese US representatives decided, of Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and Suzuki, to just play along. I think it's now an institution that lives on its own fumes and probably just doesn't question it. NHTSA, the U.S. government entity, that regulates motorcycles safety, they issue recall notices. They have the real numbers. They know how much of everything exists on the road, whether it's on road or off. So if you want an idea of how many, Electroglides were sold in 2021, just look at the recall numbers. Harley's always in the recall sheets, so it's a reliable source of data. But enough punching Harley Davidson. They're doing a great job doing that to themselves. So U.S. market, the data is pretty reliable when we go back to 2024. And I think what's really clear is since COVID, we've seen what I believe and what I advise my customers is that the U.S. motorcycle market has fundamentally shifted away from what it was for the previous 3 decades. It has now gone back to its base, to its root. And that is that the United States was never about road bikes. I would argue, and I think the data supports this, that since the dawn of the motorcycle in America has been about dirt. All of their greatest road riders, world champion racers, came off the dirt. Most Americans learned to ride on a dirt bike of some kind, whether it was just across a farm field or a friend's backyard, or in the woods or desert. The icons of American motorcycling, which in ADV Rider, Steve McQueen and the Mint 500, dirt bikes, off-road, motocross. Motocross is an American invention. Supercross, which is until recently was the most popular form of motorcycle racing in the world in terms of ability to pack humans into a single event.
Yeah.
An American invention, beer, hot dogs, pyrotechnics, music, stadium, motorcycles doing crazy things, X Games, that kind of stuff, and we see a return to that. Our off-road bikes now outsell street bikes. And I'm talking pure off-road. When you factor in, and we're looking at, for those of you listening, last year's best-selling bike in the US, the Honda CRF 300.
Last year being 2024.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
Yes, 2024. That's a dual sport. If we include dual sport, it is overwhelmingly a dirt bike market.
Okay,
it's not even close.
Let me jump in here. But what I find peculiar about this is that it's not all of a sudden we assume off-road riding with a younger demographic. But the demographic is still aging or is still quite old in America. And yet why all of a sudden all these dirt bikes? It doesn't seem to make sense to me.
It isn't all of a sudden. It has historically, roughly, almost always been 50-50. Like going back to 1980. I mean, we're talking long form data, like 40 years. In the 70s, it was lopsided and I believe that's where we're going back to, where 3/4 of motorcycles were dirt bikes. And, 1969 to 1972 was a motocross bonanza.
Yeah,
you could sell anything with knobby tires, even if it was garbage, and a lot of it was.
You're alluding to my Hodaka, aren't you?
No, I'm alluding to this European stuff that wouldn't stay running.
Right.
But some of the Japanese stuff was garbage too.
Why is this though? I mean, again, to my point, I mean, rider. It's not like all of a sudden there's do I have this wrong? I mean, it's not like there's a huge insurgence of young riders, is there?
There is. Sorry to interrupt you, but this is the thing that, look, we're on advrider.com. A lot of the people, I would say the majority of people who read motorcycle.com, ADV Rider, Ride Apart are old. They're our age and up. They're Gen X and over. And they're still used to consuming motorcycle media a certain way. And this whole podcast today is about perception versus reality.
Right.
The perception of motorcycle in America, since we're talking about the US market, is what it was. And and when you go down the street is a gray beard on a Harley, you see a gray-haired guy like me and you on a Ducati, expensive bikes, hobbyists, barely able to park the damn thing because we're failing bodies, because they're $30,000, $25,000 toys. But the facts versus the perception, you don't see unless you live in a rural area as I do, and you talk to dealers and you go to rural dealers and you look at the market data. Like, these aren't my feelings.
Yeah.
These are the facts. The fastest growing sector of motorcycling in America is electric off-road dirt bikes, that some of which skirt is it a motorized bicycle?
And these are sort of Surons and other vehicles of this side.
Talaria, Bike Tricks, Segway, and now the vast constellation of startups. But the thing about the Chinese ones is they're not startups. New, which is a huge, huge company in China, is making a dual sport, really high quality dual sport version of, let's say, a Suron. And everyone's shaking their head. It's electric. It sucks. It's not real, whatever. Okay, you do you. The numbers aren't lying. People are buying these bikes, and the people who are riding them are not Gen X. They are not boomers. They're not even millennials. They're Gen Z, because they're inexpensive, they're fun, and they feel like modern products. And I'm sorry for everyone out there who loves to tune a carb. That is not a modern product. And the CRF that we're looking at still is a modern product. It's exceptional. It's reliable. You can go around the world on it, as Itchy Boots has. Despite everyone moaning about how inadequate it is, on boards full of enthusiasts. Well, the reality is that younger people who are not navel gazing and talking in their little bubble, of which I include myself, we are that bubble. But the public at large, they look at a CRF, they look at a DRZ, less so, but they certainly look at the electric dirt bikes and they go, I get that. And I can get that. It's affordable. It's easy to use. The dealer is friendly. In the case of the Suron electric bikes, they're drop shipped to your door by an Amazon truck, or you get them at your local mom and pop that's not a big brand dealer. And we come full circle back to the 1980s. All the conversations you've had on this podcast, people really resonated with how the brands are getting out of control with pricing, how dealers are unfair. Remember how great it was when it was the mom and pop shop. Well, now there is a new generation of mom and pop shops that maybe just sell electric bikes, or they sell electric bikes and I don't know, lawn equipment. It's going back to that where you're talking to a person, and if the thing has a problem, you can go down the road and, get it sorted. And I'm talking from personal experience. There is a marina boat store about 15 kilometers from my house, because I live on the coast of Nova Scotia. A lot of boats, a lot of outboard motors and such, Zodiacs. And they happen to be a Yamaha dealer, but they also, all the little boat dealers here sell bikes. And they're kind of not big branded motorcycle shops. They've got 10, 15 machines in the back, sometimes just secondhand. And some of them are importing these smaller, they're huge companies, but like these lesser known brands.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't get accurate sales data from them in Canada and in the US because they're not registered. One. Two, there are a lot of older guys buying them. They're buying them for their kids. And they might buy two at a time. You walk into a dealer and pick up two Suron Light Bees for themselves, for their RV, and they take them to the campground. And so this data exists because, as an industry, we glean this data through import documents. So I know for certain that last year, in 2024, Suron sold almost 17,000 Light Bees in the US. And you go, well, that doesn't sound very much. That's half of Indian motorcycle companies' global sales that same year. And so when people say motorcycling is dying, no, the motorcycling we've been used to seeing is dying in the US. What is growing is, I would say, America's original route. And to answer the other question you asked is, why? Where's this coming from? Look, Canada and the US are big countries with lots of wide open space. Everyone here has the ability to go find some dirt, a trail in the woods, in the desert, in the prairie. And even if you live in a city, look, the best-selling vehicles in Canada and the US are all pickup trucks. And after that, it's SUVs. It's really easy to throw a small dirt bike either in the bed of the pickup or on one of those ball hitch, motorcycle racks that you can get at Harbor Freight for $180. Suddenly, we've made motorcycling accessible again.
And another point to that too, which is that I know when I was a kid and we'd shoot our dirt bikes down the road, the police took a very dim view of that. But now I don't think they give a shit anymore because of the excess of electric bikes running around, even if it's electric or internal combustion. I just don't think the police really even bother to it unless you're doing something really stupid like wheeling down Main Street, which is really cool if you can do it. But it's not. I don't know. For some reason, although our culture is increasingly uptight, wound up about everything, for some reason, that's one thing I think we've just decided to let go.
It's funny because here in my jurisdiction in Nova Scotia, the instigating incident wasn't a motorcycle, it was a ATVs and side-by-sides. And we see more and more states in the US and provinces or counties in Canada that are saying, oh, you can ride your ATV on the street so long as certain conditions are met. It doesn't matter. Last night, driving home in the dark, in the fog, on a coastal road, some kid on an ATV was going flat out, no rear lights, no insurance. If he hit me, he'd be dead. And if he wasn't, I don't know how he's going to cover the damage to my car. But you're right. It seems that Canada and the US have decided that, we're not going to regulate these things, nor are we going to enforce the regulations that do exist around them. California being an exception, once again, I think this is right and smart. Just recently is cracking down on these Suron type vehicles, saying you're welcome to use them, go crazy, but they can't go on a street or a bike path unless they're insured and you wear a helmet, which is not a big deal. Like, we expect that. I can't drive my car on the street without insurance. I can't drive my motorcycle on the street. I mean, either we have laws or we have anarchy. Now the question remains, how will it be enforced? Is a policeman going to chase a 15 kilowatt electric motorcycle that can accelerate from 0 to 100 faster than a Ferrari, and hop a curb and go through a backyard? But the thrust of this conversation today was about perception versus reality. The perception of American motorcycling is still Sturges, beards, and leather. That is, the data is absolutely clear. That is not dying, it is dead. It is wilting. And that's not a judgment. That is just an observation of the facts. The lovely, wonderful upside to this is that motorcycling is thriving more than I would have expected 3 years ago, thanks to affordable dual use off-road, on-road, mostly off-road vehicles, gas and electric. And the fact that the public seems to be enamored with the Kawasaki Z, essentially a naked ninja, I think is a great sign that some group of young people, mostly men, think motorcycles are cool again. And if you don't like that bike, well, tough beans. You should be grateful that anyone under the age of 50 is even looking at a large capacity, mid capacity, proper motorcycle. So Kawasaki is now the market share leader in the US, followed by Honda. So, after 3 decades of absolute domination, Harley-Davidson went from first to second last year and to third place now. And that's not a ding on Harley. It's more a reflection of changing tastes. People want affordable motorcycles that are not going to, dominate their finances. And I think that these are good signs. These are encouraging signs.
It's such a shift, isn't it, from what we saw so few years ago? I mean, in the 90s when Harley was flying so high. I mean, it was an aspirational product that so many people seemed through. I guess, so the culture through affluence that people were able to afford. It was one of those rare occasions when the halo product was something that you could actually own, wasn't it?
Well, and I don't want to single out Harley. The entire Polaris motorcycle debacle, from Victory to, Indian, and it is a debacle. From a business point of view, do you like your Indian and Polaris Victory motorcycle? Great, congratulations. I'm not judging you. The reality is, though, as a business, it was an absolute utter failure. So much money, 30 years of trying, and never really made a go of it. And it's not anecdotal. I see them all the time, and that's a real. They didn't make money. By their own admission, they're a public company. They have to reveal this. Victory was profitable 3 years out of 18, and Indian was only profitable 4 years. Catastrophic. But the zeitgeist was, well, if you're going to sell a motorcycle in America, it needs to be top of the line. And the car industry does this too, to a lesser extent. Europeans, the Germans are always importing their top tier product to the US market with all the options, saying, oh, our Americans won't buy a mid trim level. It's bullshit. Hyundai sells base trim models by the boatload. So do the Japanese. Make a compelling product at a price people are willing to pay. It's not that complicated. And to the US motorcycle market has been upsold for 3 decades. But because of the success of Harley-Davidson, everyone else emulated. BMW, the R, whatever the hell it's called, that big cruiser thing, 18, I think it's called.
Right. R18, is that it?
Yeah, I guess it's the biggest boxer thing. Like, no, I don't know the specific model sales numbers. Maybe the thing's been making, maybe they're dancing in Munich about how much money they made off of that thing. But they really struggled to sell entry-level models in everywhere, and especially the US. Not everyone's going to buy a $20,000 motorcycle that they're going to use 4 times a year. And we've seen the result, and that's okay. It went to its absolute zenith and it died. And now we see the fresh shoots coming out of the ground. As always, to the boomers listening, you know what I'm talking about. Mid 60s, what are these things coming from Japan? They're so cheap. And the old Brit bike guys, it's not a proper motorcycle. Oh, that's a Jap can, a rice burner, whatever. Insert derogatory term here. And within 10 years, the Brit bike thing was dead. And we've seen this cycle happen a bunch of times. Make these things affordable. The little Chinese, the Chinese electric bikes and increasingly the Chinese combustion bikes like CF Moto are doing exactly that. CF Moto does not make the top 10 list, but they will. That's my prediction for 2027. I think that a CF Moto model will probably be in the top 10 list in most major markets in the West, in Europe and in the US, which is a Chinese motorcycle, because they're just great bikes, hands down, at really good prices.
Victory, Michael, they gave up on the vision too soon.
Are we talking about a metaphor or the actual motorcycle?
I'm going to let you mull that over until we speak again.
Until next year.
until next month. You think that over.
All right.
Was the vision a motorcycle or was it just a vision?
It was a vision of something.
Thank you, my friend.
Always a pleasure.
This message comes from eBay. The worst part about loving cars might just be buying them and all the parts. From Toyotas to Aston Martins, eBay has thousands of cars and the largest online selection of vehicle parts and accessories. eBay, things people love. Well, here's the part of the show where I review a product. And this week, it's something called the Fuse Block FZ1. Now, what this little gizmo allows you to do is to take all those wires that go to your battery, from heated grips, from your GPS, from an auxiliary wiring, for your, say, a heated vest, and you run all the power, not to the battery, but to this thing, and then there's one connection from this to your battery. And it's a brilliant thing to clean up the wiring, because I hate messy wiring because I don't know what electricity is, so I find it extremely intimidating. So what this thing does, it allows you to have up to 6 fused circuits. And here's the brilliant thing about it, I think, aside from the fact that I can label it. But you can have constant or switched power, which means that, of course, you can have power onto a device when your motorcycle is turned off, when the ignition's off. So you can have your GPS on, so you can check your route when the motorcycle's turned off. And you can, just by hopping your fuse around, you can determine which is which. It's a brilliant thing. I'm going to have a full review of this in advrider.com in the upcoming months. But to check it out for yourself, go to fuseblocks.com. That's FUZEBLOCKS.com. It's American made. It's $103. And here's the best part. They only make one product. So you know it's good. Fuseblocks.com. The cars you'll find in eBay are just different. They come with a story that you can't wait to share. Like this 1973 Dodge Charger on eBay that had been tucked away in an Arizona barn for over 40 years. Only 55,000 miles. And somehow, in great running order. It even has a rear sunroof. Suddenly, a car that was hidden for decades is being delivered in just a few clicks with eBay's secure purchase. All the paperwork handled. There are thousands of cars on eBay, from unique finds like the Pontiac Grand Prix SJ to daily drivers. And now, with a new way to buy them. eBay, things people love. Thank you for listening to the Lowdown Radio Show.